If you weren't around in the early 2000s, it's difficult to articulate the kind of grip that zombies had on pop culture at the time. Movies like 28 Days Later and the Dawn of the Dead remake propelled zombies into the public consciousness, and the Walking Dead TV show only cemented zombies as a cultural staple to the point where it honestly got kind of annoying. Zombies eventually became a tired trope, appearing on TV shows where they really didn't need to be.
Two of the most famous mythical creatures in a head-to-head battle to the death. Zombies versus vampires.
And saturating the video game market until they eventually died off, without anyone realizing that they'd gone anywhere. That being said, there's still plenty of great zombies media out there, and in the realm of comics, without a doubt, one of the coolest was Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies was a huge deal at the time, having first premiered in Ultimate Fantastic Four in 2005. Despite being relegated just to the comic medium, even my middle school self, who didn't even read contemporary comic books, had heard about Marvel Zombies. There was something compelling about these stalwart legacy comic book characters getting twisted into flesh-eating monsters, and the phenomenal covers of the original zombie stories by Arthur Sudam only exacerbated the curiosity of would-be readers, as classic familiar images were twisted into gory horror displays. So in celebration of these landmark stories, as well as to tie in with the upcoming Disney Plus show, I decided to read every single Marvel Zombie story ever published. And boy, there was a lot. Now, full disclosure, it's October 30th, and as I'm about to hit export on this project, I see the official Marvel YouTube channel just published basically the same video as this, so fuck my life. But the difference with this series is we're going to cover everything, not just the basic plot points of the core issues, but the fringe stories, the stories that suck, and even the stories that Marvel can't acknowledge, but are canonically critical to the Marvel Zombies universe. Was the quality of these Marvel Zombie stories consistent throughout, or did it eventually lose steam and jump the shark completely, much like the zombie subgenre itself? Stay tuned to find out, but I'm pretty sure you can guess what the answer to that question is. So before we get started, I just want to lay down a couple ground rules. I did skip a couple of series that I don't think counted as part of this, so I just wanted to mention them here. There was Deadpool Merc with a Mouth 1 through 13, which guest stars the severed head of zombie Deadpool, which I didn't really think counted because it's just one zombie and it's not a true zombie story. The other was Zombie Christmas Carol, which is technically a zombie story published by Marvel, but obviously it doesn't have any zombie superheroes, so it doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about here. So besides that, we're going to be covering every single Marvel zombie story published, including some relatively obscure stuff. Also, I'm going to be splitting up this video into 3 parts. One, to get the first one out in time for Halloween, but also because I think there are 3 distinct eras of Marvel Zombies, and it makes sense to evaluate each one separately. The other thing that I want to cover really quickly is the rules of Marvel Zombies, because the rules of the zombie infection in a zombie story are some of the most important elements and what make that story work. For accuracy, I'm going to be reading from the official Marvel handbook that describes how the zombie virus works in the Marvel Zombie universe. The extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial virus that infects the Marvel Zombies causes an overall change in their physiology. Once infected, usually through a bite from a previously infected being, sentient beings begin to feel the effects within moments. They feel pain in their stomach and begin vomiting massive amounts of blood. Once the transformation is complete, usually within approximately 5 minutes, the infected being feels a hunger for flesh. However, due to the dramatic physical changes, actual consumption is no longer required, as all bodily functions except the brain and mobility have ceased. A zombie builds up a level of acid within its non-functioning digestive tract that simply dissolves the meat it consumes. Their hunger drives the zombies into frenzies, though after they sate it, they regain a good measure of their mental faculties. This hunger soon returns, so infected beings can seldom perform complex tasks for long periods before the hunger overtakes their minds again. Though infected superpowered beings retain most of their abilities, previous regenerative powers like Wolverine's healing factor are rendered inert. Because of their nature, the zombies can survive massive injury and function with large parts of their body missing. Even a zombie head detached from its body is still driven by its hunger. It appears one of the few ways to destroy a zombie is to destroy the head completely, or at least separate the entire brain from it. Since most bodily processes are no longer active, the skin of an infected being almost immediately begins to decay. The eyes cloud over, leaving them with the appearance of being without pupil, and the sense of smell becomes heightened, allowing zombies to detect living beings within their vicinity. So essentially, the virus is spread by a bite, that superpowered being retains all of their superpowers, and they have an insatiable hunger for flesh that doesn't go away until the end of their undead lives. So pretty basic zombie stuff. But with all of that out of the way, let's get to the blood and guts of this video, the comics. And contrary to what you might think, the beginning of Marvel Zombies does not start in Marvel Zombies 1, but in the pages of Marvel's first family. The first stop on our journey is Ultimate Fantastic Four number 21, released in 2005. For those who might not know what the Ultimate Universe is, it's kind of a lot to explain, but basically this is just a separate ongoing continuity that Marvel had started in the early 2000s. Having a timeline separate from the standard 616 timeline allowed Marvel to retell stories in a fresh new way, reinvent characters, and make bolder creative decisions since they weren't beholden to a never-ending storyline that always had to continue. This meant that when characters were killed off, they would be killed off permanently, and it gave space for characters like Miles Morales and the Maker to develop. Eventually, Marvel combined the 616 universe with the Ultimate Universe in the 2015 event Secret Wars, which we'll be covering down the line, as Marvel Zombies served a pretty important role in that story as well. But at the point of Ultimate Fantastic Four number 21, the Ultimate Universe was pretty young, and the wider Ultimate world looked pretty similar to the 616 timeline. At the beginning of UFF number 21, Fantastic Four is experimenting with time travel, hunting down chrono bandits who have taken the first step in humanity's evolution for ransom. Sue quickly dispatches them, but after the FF returns to the present, they take flack for taking on such a dangerous mission themselves, instead of giving the assignment to the Ultimates, this universe's version of the Avengers. Reed lies to Professor Storm, promising that he'll stop pursuing his dangerous passion projects and resume the boring profitable work that helps fund the Baxter Building. Later on, Reed turns down a date with Sue so he can continue working on his pet project. A voice off screen starts giving the young Reed advice on how to handle his argument with Sue, speaking from experience, and it's revealed that he's speaking to an older Reed whom we're led to believe is 616 Reed. Ultimate Reed confides in this Reed about his universe, they compare and contrast their histories, and it's revealed that the hologram Reed has helped Ultimate Reed finish building a transdimensional teleporter. Ironically, this teleporter is going to end up being one of the most important objects in all of the zombie universe. When Reed crosses over, he immediately realizes that something is off. The lab looks abandoned, he discovers a decaying body, and the outside is an apocalyptic wasteland. He turns around to meet this universe's Fantastic Four, and it turns out the Reed at the other end of the hologram was a zombie. In rereading this series for this video, I was reminded how incredible Mark Millar's writing is. The dialogue is snappy, and he's probably better than anyone at playing with established characters, taking wild creative concepts, and making them work. The art by Greg Land also pops. It reeks of early 2000s in a way that's really charming, at least to me, and it gives a cinematic feel. This creative battery continues into the following issue, which opens with an origin story for the zombie virus. It all started with a flash in the sky and a ripple through the clouds. This bit of exposition becomes a kind of tagline for the Zombies universe for some reason. I don't know, I really don't think this line is that iconic or foreboding, but you see this line referenced all the time in future issues. A zombified version of the Sentry crash landed on Earth, apparently sent by some kind of sentient infection that Zombie Reed claims deliberately targeted their universe. Sentry, being Sentry, overpowered the heroes who arrived on scene, and the entire planet was consumed in 24 hours. Zombie Reed confirms that the only reason he went through the process of bringing Ultimate Reed to this dimension was for more food, and the Zombie Fantastic Four attack. Ultimate Reed escapes and takes in his surroundings. Ultimate Reed laments how he could have fallen for such a trick, and there's a couple reasons for this. For one, it's cosmic punishment for flying too close to the sun. Unlike the 616 universe, where Reed's experiments are always righted in the end, in the Ultimate Universe, Reed pays for his greed. This is teased earlier when we see Sue's frustration over the time Reed spends tinkering, but instead of Sue and Reed kissing and making up by the end of the issue, it's one of the many wedges that drives them further apart until they eventually separate, and Ultimate Reed adopts the identity of the Maker. The other reason Ultimate Reed is susceptible to Zombie Reed's gambit is because Zombie Reed is smart enough to take advantage of Reed's greatest vulnerability in every universe, his optimism. Reed Richards constantly feels a responsibility to use his great intelligence for the betterment of humankind. Ultimate Reed believes that his passion projects of transdimensional travel are more important to humanity than the Baxter Building's budget, so he prioritizes Earth's progress over his research funding. Even when he becomes the Maker, he's still just trying to propel humanity forward in the only way he knows how. Zombie Reed, also being Reed himself, knows this as well as anyone, and sees himself as the key to bringing more flesh into their dimension. Ultimate Reed quickly runs into the rest of the Marvel zombies, including a terrifying Hulk zombie, but just when Ultimate Reed is about to meet his end, a metal truck slams into Zombie Hulk. The other Marvel zombies recognize they're in trouble, and Ultimate Reed sees his savior as none other than arch-villain mutant Magneto, noticeably unzombified. Magneto brings Reed back to his safe house, where he's hiding out with a few non-mutant survivors. Reed explains he's from another dimension, and hypothesizes that if he crossed over, that means he can cross back to return home. But Magneto reveals that if a teleporter to his world still exists, his universe is already doomed. Back at the Baxter building, the other Ultimate FF notice Reed is missing and discover his teleporter. Suddenly, the teleporter activates, the FF expect Reed, and, well, it's Reed alright. Opening up the final issue of this trilogy, the Zombie Fantastic Four attack because, obviously, and the Ultimate Fantastic Four retreat deeper into the building. At Magneto's hideout, the situation gets desperate as the daughter of one of the survivors is diabetic and she's running out of insulin. Magneto assures the father that he'll venture out to get more, but the daughter realizes that they're merely postponing the inevitable. She pitches the idea of using the teleporter to go to the Ultimate Universe, where they would actually have a chance at long-term survival. As they start crafting a plan, their hideout is discovered by zombies and attacked. Magneto is a formidable force in fending off the initial attack, but word of the survivors' location quickly spreads, and they're soon surrounded by seemingly the entire Marvel Universe. Suddenly, every zombie becomes blind, and we see the Ultimate Fantastic Four heroically appear to save the day as they somehow manage to take down the Zombie FF off camera. The UFF help the survivors get to the teleporter at the top of the Baxter building. But wait, in typical zombie movie fashion, somebody has to stay behind to destroy the machine so the zombies can't come back. Magneto understands that this is his role to play, and the survivors return to the Ultimate Dimension. So that was the first entry into the Marvel Zombies canon. It's easy to understand the potential that Marvel saw in a series like this. In some respects, it's a typical zombie survival story, but a zombie universe full of evil, flesh-hungry heroes was a compelling idea. Throw in the usually evil Magneto turning his human-hating ways aside to lead a group of survivors, there's clearly enough there to satisfy a spin-off or two, or three, or four, or five. One year later, in 2006, Marvel released a 5-issue limited series set solely in the zombieverse, Marvel Zombies, which I'll call Marvel Zombies 1 just for clarity's sake. Zombies 1 was drawn by Sean Phillips, whose art, while seemingly utilitarian, has this grimy edge to it. Particularly the inking, I thought, added a dark tone to these otherwise bright, colorful superhero designs. It really gives an identity to this series. The story was also written by this guy named Robert Kirkman. I don't know, I didn't look into this guy too much, but it's clear that he has a knack for the horror genre, particularly the zombie subgenre. So if anybody knows of any kind of other zombie comic books he might have worked on, or maybe a TV show or something like that, please let me know down in the comments because I'd love to check those out. Zombies 1 opens with Magneto acknowledging his success in teleporting the survivors safely to the Ultimate Universe. He now has to face the hordes of zombie heroes, and we get to see what Magneto's powers can really do when he's not holding back. You might be a little disappointed that there's no blood here, the gore is replaced by this gray goop, but it's still effectively disturbing, especially later in the story. Magneto uses Colonel America's shield to decapitate him with some trademark Kirkman dark humor, and oh yeah, I guess I should mention this now. For the most part, the zombie universe is effectively the same as the 616 universe, with every hero immortalized in their most classic iteration, except here, Captain America is called Colonel America for some reason. It never really gets explained why or gets brought up again in a meaningful way, he's just Colonel America. During Magneto's escape, he's contacted by Asteroid M, a safe haven in space where his acolytes live free from the zombie menace. He concocts a plan to return to them before resuming his escape from the zombies. He uses Cap's shield to decapitate zombie Hawkeye, a detail that will become relevant later, and taunts the attacking heroes before finally being taken down by the Wasp, who sneaks behind him unseen. Channeling the iconic death of Rhodes in Day of the Dead, Magneto curses the heroes before he's violently torn apart in what's a really disturbing scene. There's an unsettling tone in this original zombie storyline that you really don't get in many of these subsequent spin-offs and sequels. It's exhibited here in this scene. Seeing one of these characters, which have essentially always existed as beacons of hope and optimism, eat one of their opponents alive really bothers you in a way that is unique to the horror genre. It's not the bloodiest zombie comic ever, there's obviously no jump scares, but just something purely horrific in the tone here. And I think a huge part of that is Robert Kirkman's writing. We flash forward to the aftermath of the devouring of Magneto. Again, a ton of trademark Kirkman dark humor. Hulk, having calmed down and transformed into Bruce Banner, now has his Hulk-sized meal sitting in his stomach waiting to explode. Spider-Man's leg is hanging on by a spider thread, and Colonel America is collecting his spilled brains. Spider-Man, who routinely serves as the voice of reason among the zombie heroes, gets hit by a wave of guilt over Magneto's consumption, which the rest of the zombies have all heard before. Peter reveals he ate Mary Jane and Aunt May, while Hank Pym consoles him, telling him they've all done regrettable things after becoming infected. Bruce begs someone to hit him to become the Hulk so his food can be properly digested, but not before a femur bursts out of his stomach in a scene that is really fucking nasty and always stuck out to me. Just then, they spot something in the sky. Their next meal, the Silver Surfer. Issue number 2 opens with the hunt for the Silver Surfer, and the Horde concocts a plan to capture the Surfer and obtain information on where they can find more flesh. Hank sneaks away from the group, using the time to check in on his cruel experiment, keeping a maimed T'Challa barely alive as he attempts to find a cure. At first, you would assume that Hank's motivations are altruistic and he's doing what he has to try to save the world. But the more he keeps monologuing, it's clear that there's something much more sinister going on here. Hank is using a bone saw to cut off parts of T'Challa one at a time so he can consume them and keep his mind clear during his experiments. It's revealed that T'Challa never consented to being used like this, and Hank keeps him so sedated that T'Challa can never speak up and object to this and make Hank feel guilty. He also admits that he enjoys the taste of flesh, and that even if the virus is cured, he'd still like to find an ethical way to keep consuming human meat. Once again, this all feels very in character for a zombified version of one of the most problematic and damaged heroes in the Marvel Universe. And speaking of problematic, just as Hank is about to eat T'Challa's severed foot, Wasp discovers T'Challa and demands that he share him with her. Zombie Hank backhands her, which is very much in character for Hank Pym, but then Zombie Hank bites her head off, which we never saw regular Hank do anything like that. After seemingly killing his wife, Hank finishes off his foot, but not before he hears T'Challa beg for death. Hank leaves him to suffer, once again suggesting that Hank's intentions in keeping him alive are likely a lot crueler than he tries to tell himself. As the Surfer surveys what the hell happened in this world, Iron Man arrives asking for an update on the hunt for Magneto. The other zombies try to cover up that they ate him without sharing, but Tony sees through their lie. Tony and Steve try to come up with a plan to get more food for the group. It feels like any other Avengers story where the two leaders are coming up with a plan of action, but instead of saving the world, they're trying to eat people. As they're reviewing more options for food sources, they spot the Surfer again, and predictably, they view him as their next meal. The Surfer, who still hasn't arrived in this timeline yet, heralds Galactus, and then he gives his de facto Silver Surfer speech about the world being marked for consumption. Of course, the zombies don't really have any kind of concern over that, so they attack. Faring much better than Magneto, the Surfer is able to ward off the attack. For a time, Hulk delivers the kill shot by biting the Surfer's head clean off. As they fight over the scraps of this relatively small meal, the zombie heroes notice something is different about the Hulk. By consuming the Surfer, the zombies are imbued with the power cosmic, and suddenly the zombie threat just got a whole lot more serious for the entire multiverse. We then cut back to T'Challa, who's escaped Hank's lab, along with the severed head of Janet. As T'Challa puts the pieces together of what happened to the outside world, he encounters the acolytes of Magneto from Asteroid M, who are searching for their leader and probably aren't too keen on seeing T'Challa holding the severed head of a zombie. We then see the zombies experimenting with their new powers, reviewing all the opportunities they open up to consume new flesh, until they're interrupted from the previously heralded Galactus. He asks what happened to his herald, Hank immediately owns up to eating him, and Galactus is pissed. Seeing their biggest meal of all time in front of them, and with newfound cosmic power, they fearlessly head straight in to fight this omnipotent space god. Knowing a thing or two about hunger himself, Galactus sees the irony in facing off with an unstoppable force, fueled by insatiable desire to consume. Nonetheless, he defends himself, and at first it looks like the hordes of Marvel zombies have finally met their match. Hank comes up with a plan and asks his fellow zombies to meet him in his secret lab. He plans on revealing the alive T'Challa to the others. To do what, I'm not sure, but to his surprise, he's escaped. At that moment, T'Challa is trying to convince the acolytes of his innocence, and the severed zombie head is not helping. One of the acolytes suggests killing T'Challa and returning to their sanctuary, and so T'Challa is forced to defend himself. Somehow, this convinces the leader of the acolytes, Cortez, to bring T'Challa with them, and T'Challa insists they allow Janet's head to come along. Back at the lab, Hank finishes his latest gadget, which he hopes will give them the edge against Galactus. They also get a surprising bit of reinforcements in the form of the villains. On Asteroid M, T'Challa and Zombie Jan arrive safely, and the Acolytes assume Magneto has perished. They're introduced to Reynolds, the stereotypical science nerd desperate to find a cure, who takes an interest in Jan. He's also introduced to Hendrix, a female survivor, and Forge, who offers to build T'Challa prosthetic limbs. On Earth, the battle against Galactus enters its final stage, as the zombie heroes shoot Galactus with what I believe is a version of the Ultimate Nullifier. As Galactus falls, the villains start to call dibs on what parts of Galactus they're going to devour first. The heroes obviously take issue with this, as they didn't show up until the last minute. Of course, we get a classic battle of heroes versus villains. With their cosmic power, the heroes make quick work of the villains, although Red Skull does get the opportunity to lobotomize Colonel America. At the last moment, Galactus shows a bit of life, but the heroes quickly overpower him before he can retaliate. And then, the mighty Devourer is devoured himself. We don't get to see the aftermath of Galactus' death, and instead flash forward 5 years later to the survivors from Asteroid M, arriving on Earth to survey what remains and see if it's safe to come back from space. T'Challa takes a leadership role with the survivors, he has a child with Hendrix, and Jan is given a robot body. They confirm that there is absolutely no life left on Earth, including the zombies, but T'Challa knows that this only means that they're still out there somewhere. In the final scene of the series, we see the royal family of a distant alien planet putting their child to bed. The ruler's advisor warns him that Galactus will arrive at any moment, and their planet is doomed to be consumed. Of course, this time Galactus is not a giant purple guy, but the Marvel zombies. I see this ending as less the Marvel zombies replace Galactus, but rather, a more unstoppable force has consumed Galactus, therefore becoming the new Galactus. In Fantastic Four number 262, Galactus' true form was retconned to not be a huge humanoid giant, but an imperceivable force of destruction. Each culture perceives him differently, usually as their own mythological god of destruction, and he essentially exists as this imperceptible Lovecraftian horror. In that respect, it would make sense that Galactus would simply be an identity given to the strongest destructive force in the galaxy. Both Galactus and the zombies have an insatiable appetite that they traverse the galaxy to attempt to satisfy, and so from that perspective, they basically adopt the mantle of Galactus. And that cliffhanger is the end of Marvel Zombies 1. It's hard to imagine a more perfect execution of this concept. In my opinion, Robert Kirkman's writing is the most significant ingredient in what makes this series work so well. The action and pacing of the story feel just like you're watching a zombie movie, the dialogue is snappy and darkly humorous without being over the top, the imagery he crafted, aided of course by the art of Sean Phillips, is effectively disturbing and still stuck with me years after I'd forgotten the actual plot. But most of all, as I keep reiterating, Kirkman's ability to take these classic characters and twist them in ways that are unsettling yet still true to the character captures that horror vibe that elevates Marvel Zombies beyond your standard stock zombie slop from that time period. Just a look at the covers tells you all you need to know. Images you immediately recognize, but with a disturbing horror twist. And you know what? Audiences at the time felt exactly the same, which is why this landmark series spawned sequel after sequel after sequel after sequel, all of which we'll cover here. Now, if you're trying to read all the Marvel Zombie stories in chronological order, you might be thinking that the next entry in your list is Marvel Zombies 2, but you would be sorely mistaken. The next entry in the Zombieverse is actually a limited series that I didn't even know existed until I did research for this video, and that is Marvel Zombies vs. Army of Darkness. The cult classic Evil Dead movies were a landmark trilogy that successfully mixed horror and comedy in a way that was ripe for expansion and adaptation. In the early 2000s, Dynamite Comics launched a sequel series picking up after the events of the third movie, Army of Darkness. This also included some spin-off series including Ash vs. Reanimator, Ash vs. Dracula, and Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, which might be the most early 2000s concept I've ever heard in my life. Of course, the reason we're talking about these comics is because of their spin-off with Marvel Zombies, which they first published in 2007. I honestly was not looking forward to reading this series just because I felt like the reason it was buried was because it was hacky and forced, but I was pleasantly surprised with how it captured the horror comedy tone of the Evil Dead series, and it turns out it's actually an inextricable part of the Marvel Zombies canon, so you can't ignore it if you want the full story. The events of this storyline are actually specifically mentioned in the official Marvel Zombies handbook, so Funnily enough, Ash Williams is an official canon Marvel character in the greater Marvel multiverse. Fun fact, he belongs to universe 818793, which is a reference to the release years of the original Evil Dead trilogy. Also, I just want to note, this series is relatively expensive to read legally, presumably because licensing issues make it difficult to reprint, so I just want to stress that I purchased a copy of all 5 issues from an authorized dealer 100% legally, and every single issue is sitting on my shelf right over there, just off frame, I promise you. So with that out of the way, let's get to what is honestly one of the best Marvel Zombie spin-offs, Marvel Zombies vs. Army of Darkness. Issue 1 opens in New York City, where our first introduction to our hero is him seemingly attacking a homeless person fresh after he's teleported from another dimension. It turns out that that homeless lady is actually a Deadite, although whether Ash actually knew that or not before throwing an apple at her isn't really confirmed. Ash is interrupted by a battle between Daredevil and Thunderball, and when Daredevil sees a seemingly innocent old lady being attacked by a crazy guy with a chainsaw for a hand, it creates an opening for Thunderball to finish off Daredevil. Of course, Ash, being the idiot that he is, has no idea that he just helped the villain in this situation. Ash visits Avengers Mansion to try to get a beat on where he is and why all these superheroes are running around, when suddenly he remembers what brought him to this dimension. Ash was seemingly sent down from heaven to warn the zombie dimension about the incoming outbreak, and it turns out he was actually canonically there when Sentry first spread the virus. This gets a little weird, but basically Ash was in a dimension that he believed was the afterlife. He saw the zombie Sentry in a dimension that was not the zombieverse, and the Sentry was so irritated with him, he smacked him so hard, he left heaven and entered the zombieverse, where he tried to warn the heroes about the Sentry's arrival in the zombieverse. And of course, we all know how successful that was. After Spider-Man gets bitten in the ensuing melee, he captures Ash as the Marvel zombies confront him. Peter convinces the other zombies to leave Ash for himself. He takes him to a rooftop, presumably to consume him, but when Ash starts fighting back, Peter reveals that he hasn't turned yet, likely because his radioactive spider bite has staved off the infection, at least temporarily. Ash and Peter then take in the sights around them, and we get a really over-the-top spread of the carnage. We see Cap cleaving a guy in two with his shield, the Wasp stealing a dude's ear to munch on it, and Black Widow eating a puppy? Unlike Zombies 1, the horror meter goes over the top and into the so graphic it's funny territory in a way that feels extremely fitting for Evil Dead. Spider-Man leaves to tend to his family, which, again, we know how that ends, and suddenly Punisher makes a dramatic entrance through the fog. It's pretty funny to see these two macho men try to out-alpha each other, and we get treated to some pretty funny dialogue. Punisher uses the zombie apocalypse to head to the crime den of Kingpin and Hammerhead. The Kingpin extends a peace offering, saying that now that the zombie virus threatens humanity, they're all on the same team. You can probably guess how Frank takes that offer. It's a funny, morbid scene, and I especially like this exchange at the end. Punisher, having successfully out-alphaed Ash, starts barking orders at him, and of course Ash doesn't take too kindly to this. They then get attacked by a group of zombies. Frank counts on Ash's backup, but because he rubbed Ash the wrong way, he leaves him to die. Ash runs into Dazzler, and he only stops to help because of how hot she is. The scene feels kind of dated, but once again, this is the kind of behavior you'd expect from a meathead like Ash. The two head into the Sanctum Sanctorum with hopes of gaining more information about the Necronomicon and seeing if it has the ability to stop this Deadite/Marvel zombie infection once and for all. But before they can enter, our hero is brutally ambushed and lobotomized by, of all characters, Howard the Duck. To open issue 3, once again, things get really weird with the reality hopping stuff. We're introduced to a new Ash, one native to the zombieverse, who lives a mundane life. When the outbreak breaks out, he grabs his boomstick and his chainsaw and heads out to fight. He actually witnesses the previous Ash get killed by Howard, and you can't help but wonder if this entire plot point of multiple Ashes was crafted solely to create a panel where a zombie Howard the Duck lobotomizes Ash Williams. Before we see another Ash die to Howard the Duck, Scarlet Witch arrives to save the day, and she joins the other two survivors. Suddenly, Zombie Thor arrives on scene, and the trio is forced to enter the Sanctum, only to walk in on Doctor Strange eating Wong. Ash tells Strange that they're here to save the day if he can lead them to his library. Once they reach the library, Ash promptly blows his head off. One of Strange's other evil books tells the group that the Necronomicon is currently at Doom's castle in Latveria, but of course by the time they get there, it's already overrun with zombies. Issue number 4 opens with a bit more background as to how the zombie virus spread so quickly. Quicksilver was tricked by a zombie Mystique pretending to be human, and once the Marvel Flash got infected, the rest of the Marvel universe quickly fell. When we first see Ash, being the irreverent asshole that he is, he's obviously not getting along with Doom very well. The trio tries to convince Doom to let them have the Necronomicon, but he refuses as he doesn't believe it has any connection with what's going on outside. Doom sends Ash to his dungeon, and Doom and Dazzler have a conversation about Doom's plans for humanity's survival. In an appropriately evil fashion, Doom saved a portion of Latveria's population, but only the strong and able-bodied in order to give humanity the greatest chance of prosperity. He also reveals that Reed Richards infected the other Fantastic Four without their knowledge, and allowed them to infect him in order to reach a higher level of existence. I get that this is an alternate universe, but this is the one bit of lore drop that I felt kind of crossed the line and was out of character for a version of Reed that should be pretty identical to the 616 Reed. Back in the dungeon, Scarlet Witch breaks Ash out, and the two craft a plan to take the Necronomicon from Doom. Ash dresses in the body of the Doombot created in Doom's image, and he's allowed access to Doom's library. He faces his old buddy, the Necronomicon, but unfortunately the Book of the Dead reveals that it's powerless to stop the zombie outbreak. See, the prophecy foretold by the Necronomicon says that it will raise an army of the dead, and the world will be destroyed. Ash was counting on the fact that if the army of the dead that the Necronomicon controls could be stopped, the world could be saved, as foretold by the prophecy. But the Necronomicon points out that the Army of Darkness and the end of the world have nothing to do with each other. The world will end, but it might have nothing to do with the Deadites. So Ash is screwed. Issue 4 ends with Ash encountering Enchantress in Doom's dungeon, and it's already pretty clear what's about to happen. Admittedly, this zombie Enchantress probably could have tricked Ash without any enchanting abilities, but regardless, he's about to meet his end, but at least this time it's not at the hands of a cartoon duck. In the final issue, Dazzler attempts to defend Ash, who's powerless against the hot zombie Enchantress, but she gets bitten. Way to go. As soon as you think this is going to create some kind of interesting moral complication for their trio, Doom burns Dazzler and Enchantress's heads off, and we completely skip that entire dilemma. One of Doom's advisors breaks in to tell his leader that Castle Doom is now completely surrounded. Ironically, a medieval castle surrounded by an army of the undead is very familiar territory for Ash Williams. The castle walls are quickly breached. Doom is entangled by zombie Reed Richards, and when Ash looks to Wanda to escape, a rightfully pissed off Punisher is eating her alive, promising Ash that he'll get his revenge. Ash runs off, and in a last-ditch effort, he confronts the Necronomicon once again. He reasons with the book that because he's written with human blood, he could become a target for the zombies as well, so it's in his best interest to help him. The plan? To summon the Army of Darkness to fight off the Marvel zombies, fulfilling the prophecy, and oddly enough fulfilling the title of this comic book. As Ash uses this distraction to make an escape, he hears Doom sending the last of his people through an interdimensional teleporter. He allows Ash to enter as well, as thanks for letting him take revenge on a zombified Reed Richards. Ash enters the portal but ditches the Book of the Dead. The Necronomicon warns the zombie Wolverine that he can try to eat him, but he probably won't taste very good. Wolverine tells him how ridiculous that sounds and asks him why he would eat a book. The Necronomicon realizes he's been tricked, but as soon as he thinks he's safe in the zombie dimension, Wolverine tosses him to Zombie Hulk to be used as toilet paper for his decaying, flesh-ridden, Hulk-sized shits. Gross. With a gateway to unlimited, interdimensional realities, Ash is of course picky with which version of Earth he decides to settle down in. He decides on an Earth that seems pretty normal, until we see that instead of zombies, this dimension is infested with lichens. Out of the frying pan and into the fire for the ever-tortured Ash Williams. So that's Marvel Zombies vs. Army of Darkness. And honestly, even though it's only the second zombie spin-off published, it still feels insanely refreshing, especially when you compare it to later zombie stories we see down the line. As I mentioned earlier, it absolutely nails the horror comedy tone of the Evil Dead franchise. Despite the pretty gratuitous gore and bloodshed, it feels lighthearted and is legitimately funny. Even if you're not a fan of Evil Dead, Ash's character as a bumbling idiot who's not nearly as suave as he thinks he is immediately clear and likable, and seeing how he interacts with the larger zombies universe is the most enjoyable part about this series. And speaking of the zombies universe, if you want to be a zombies aficionado and get the entire zombie story, you kinda can't skip Army of Darkness. There are some important bits of lore in here that add flavor to how the outbreak unfolded, and once again, I need to stress that Ash is mentioned in detail in the official Marvel handbook. It's as canon as anything else in these zombie stories. Bottom line, the writing by John Layman completely nails the tone the story needed. The art by the collective team of Fabiano Neves, Fernando Blanco, and the aforementioned Sean Phillips captures that cinematic feel, and the pacing feels like you're watching a new Evil Dead movie for the first time, but with Marvel characters. This is simply one of the best Marvel zombie stories out there. If you skipped it due to its relative scarcity, do what I did and definitely purchase every single issue legally on eBay and read them that way. Our next entry is a one-shot comic, Marvel Zombies Dead Days. With readers desperate to dive deeper into the zombieverse, Marvel commissioned a one-shot set to further explore that world. Robert Kirkman and Sean Phillips were back, so it certainly felt like a legitimate extension of Marvel Zombies 1. Probably not going to spend too much time talking about this one just because it's only a one-shot, but a majority of it is just fight scenes and illustrating some lore bits that were hinted at in Marvel Zombies vs. Army of Darkness. In some respects, you could substitute reading Dead Days for Army of Darkness and vice versa, but you should probably just read Army of Darkness because it's way better. At the start of Dead Days, we pick up right after Spidey leaves Ash Williams with the Punisher, which I still can't believe that's a real thing, and he checks on his family. He quickly turns into a zombie and yeah, he eats MJ and Aunt May. I will say that this and some of the other scenes later in the comic do carry over the horrific, disturbing tone of Marvel Zombies 1. Something about seeing Peter devour two of the people he's most sworn to protect, and how you can tell that he's doing it against his will, but can't control himself. It's an unsettling concept. But at the same time, it kind of speaks to one of the main problems with this one shot, which is the redundancy. You're probably familiar with the idea that in horror movies, what you don't see is much scarier than what you can see, because the images that your mind can conjure up are way more frightening than anything you could see on screen. And that kind of rings true here as well. Obviously, seeing this scene play out is unsettling, but that one page in Zombies 1 where Peter feels the rush of remorse over eating MJ and Aunt May, that is all you need to know. It's just as, if not more effective, than seeing that same image drawn out. In the next scene, we get one of the only new bits of information about this world. Remember Magneto, the reformed villain who puts his differences aside to save human and mutant kind alike from the zombie menace who you were sad to see get eaten in Zombies 1? Well, turns out he and his acolytes actually brought the zombie virus to Earth, somehow and for some reason. He implies it's because he thought the virus could only affect humans and so mutants could rule the Earth, but I still don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. I also don't understand how Magneto could have summoned the infected Sentry from another dimension. Magneto is powerful and resourceful, but interdimensional observation and teleportation is way beyond his scope, and they don't even bother to elaborate on this either. Personally, I think this really undermines Magneto's character arc. Rather than someone who saw the zombie threat and nobly realized the error of his ways, he just helps everyone out of some weird sense of guilt after sort of succeeding in committing a genocide. This is just a pointless reveal that doesn't go anywhere and shits on the story of an otherwise really cool version of Magneto. Back on Earth, Nova walks in on Spider-Man eating his family, and they fight. Not that much to say. Cap arrives and suggests that they all go to Avengers Mansion to think of a plan, as if they couldn't just think of one right there. But then we see that this is because the plot needs him to go to Avengers Mansion, so we can see yet another scene mentioned in Marvel Zombies 1 when all the Avengers take turns eating Jarvis. We then cut to Hank as he asks T'Challa to follow him to his lab. Once again, we read Zombies 1, so we know where this is going. At the Baxter building, we see a pretty gruesome scene of Reed holding Valeria as she bleeds out after she's bitten by zombie She-Hulk. Having been a former member of the Fantastic Four, she's able to sneak into a restricted area and attack her. Sue expands a force field bubble inside of She-Hulk's head and makes it explode, which is admittedly really cool, especially considering this is still normal Sue. Back on the ground, Reed rallies the remaining heroes and takes them to the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, which acts as a kind of Noah's Ark as the heroes formulate a plan. Later on, Reed, supposedly hard at work on a cure, comes to the conclusion that this virus is just the next step in humanity's evolution and it should be welcomed. Once again, this scene was already described in Army of Darkness, and I still don't think it really makes any sense or is in character for Reed at all. I guess the idea is that the traumatic death of Valeria drove Reed insane, but I still don't buy this. Reed reveals that he's already infected the Fantastic Four, and he gives himself up to be devoured. He quickly becomes the zombie Reed that kicked off the series, and immediately sees the potential in using their interdimensional teleporter to find new food sources. The plan was initially to use the teleporter to get everyone to safety somewhere like the Negative Zone, but Nick Fury realizes that they'd only be opening up other dimensions to the spread of the zombie virus, so he heroically asks Thor to destroy the teleporter. Him and the other heroes make a valiant last stand, which does not last very long. Nick Fury is completely consumed, and the zombie storyline is right back where it started. You know when horror movies jump the shark and they add so much explaining in the sequel that it ruins the mystery of the villain?
A deity? What kind of deity?
A very obscure one, dating back to Babylonian times, named Bagul.
Or a horror franchise that goes on so long that they keep adding all of this lore that's really not necessary? That is Marvel Zombies Dead Days. It's far from the worst Zombies comic, as it feels at home with the rest of the series, and there's a few moments of dark humor that are legitimately funny. But once again, so many of these scenes are pointless, and the expansions on characters like Magneto and Reed feel out of place. Once again, instead of reading this, just read Army of Darkness. And speaking of out of place, before we finally get to Marvel Zombies 2, we have one more diversion, this time in the form of a miniseries inside the pages of the Black Panther series from the early 2000s. Like the Evil Dead tie-in, this is a part of the Zombies canon that you can easily miss if you're only looking for titles that contain the words Marvel Zombies. And honestly, if you don't read these comics, you're not missing much. The first Black Panther issue listed in most Zombies reading lists is Black Panther number 28, but I actually recommend starting with Black Panther number 27, since 28 cold opens with the zombies already attacking, and it's extremely hard to tell what the hell is happening. At this point in Marvel history, T'Challa is ruling over Wakanda with his Queen Storm in the fallout from Civil War. For the purposes of this Zombies retrospective, all you really need to know is that T'Challa, Storm, and the Fantastic Four have to fight these bug things to capture this magical frog thing that teleports them across space and time. They land on a hostile Skrull-inhabited planet, and before they know it, the Marvel Zombies, aka the New Galactus, appear, turning the situation from bad to worse. The Skrulls recognize the group of heroes as Galactus, although they don't view it as their own version of a god of destruction, but instead recognize them as a unit of zombified Marvel characters. Now, you could come up with a theory about how the zombie heroes are still Galactus, but they're a false Galactus, which is why the Skrulls don't see them as their god of destruction, and I actually think the writers just fucked up here. And from there, there's really not that much to say. The zombies breach the defenses, they argue with each other, etc. It's much less a critical entry in the zombies timeline, and more so a fun, somewhat lighthearted Black Panther adventure featuring the Marvel Zombies just because they were so popular at the time. Near the end of the second issue, we do get a cool moment where T'Challa asks the Skrulls to contact Earth. He speaks to the zombie-verse version of T'Challa, who's now living in a sanctuary on Earth, married to Hendrix. I think T'Challa does this because he's trying to figure out a way to stop the zombies, but the humans on Earth don't really tell him anything meaningful, so there's not much point to this scene besides being a cool callback. Zombie Luke Cage discovers that T'Challa and company are from another dimension, and comes up with the idea that they could have a whole new universe of food if they utilize transdimensional teleportation, which is only like the 5th time we've seen that fucking concept so far in these series. The zombies confront the heroes to try to get the frog, the heroes use it to escape without so much as a struggle, and seemingly they return to their home dimension. I don't think it's fair to judge this Black Panther story by the same standards as the regular zombie stories, since zombies aren't the focus, and the tone of this Black Panther title is adventure, not horror. There's some good signature zombies dark humor sprinkled throughout, and it's an entertaining read, but if you're not a completionist when it comes to zombies, this is a hard skip. There aren't really any big reveals, a lot of the same ideas get explored over and over again. If you're reading in chronological order, it's just more fat you gotta cut through in order to get to the true next evolution of the zombies universe, the appropriately titled Marvel Zombies 2. At long last, we have the first numbered sequel to Marvel Zombies 1, which this is very subtle, but I really like how they kept like the horror movie tone by just calling it Marvel Zombies 2. A lot of the filler stories in between 1 and 2 are just that. They flesh out the world and lore a little bit, but this is the first time that a zombie series is actually advancing the zombieverse. Robert Kirkman and Sean Phillips return, and as a result, make this series feel like a movie director returning to create a quality sequel for a blockbuster horror movie. Issue 1 opens with the Marvel Zombies having finally eaten all life in the known universe. There are some new cosmic additions to the zombie ranks, like Zombie Firelord, Zombie Gladiator, and Zombie Thanos. Within the first 4 pages, we already have the Hulk crushing Thanos' head, and Gladiator trying to eat his eyeballs, so already the gross out humor is back in full effect. The zombies are starving, so they craft a plan to head back to Earth because, take a guess, Earth has a transdimensional teleporter they can use to cross dimensions to find more food. On their way back, Spider-Man admits to Luke Cage that he's gone so long without eating that his hunger is actually starting to go away, so there's a glimmer of hope for these heroes. Back on Earth, T'Challa's grandson finds the head of zombie Hawkeye, which was teased in Marvel Zombies 1, and takes him back to the human sanctuary to speak to the Wasp. We see now that it's been several decades since the events of Marvel Zombies 1. T'Challa is now an old man, and in the absence of the zombie threat, he's established a prosperous new colony of Wakanda. Forge, now serving an advisory role to King T'Challa, reveals that Magneto's acolytes have formed a rogue faction that's vying for control of New Wakanda. T'Challa argues that they can't banish the group because that'd be damaging the gene pool, plus it also wouldn't be very democratic. Janet then appears with Reynolds and T'Challa's grandson, who shows his grandfather the head of zombie Hawkeye. Wasp uses Hawkeye and her own rehabilitation as proof that it's possible for the zombies' hunger to be beaten and go away completely. These scenes back on Earth feel very much like Day of the Dead, where you have a sanctuary of survivors who are fighting more amongst themselves than against the zombies. You have scientist types that are trying to discover a cure and live with the zombies. And overall, I wouldn't be surprised if the third Dead film was a major inspiration for Kirkman's direction. Later that night, an assassin inspired by the Acolyte faction led by Cortez's grandson sneaks into T'Challa's bedchamber and stabs him. The wound is obviously fatal, and so Hendrix begs Zombie Jan to bite him so he'll become infected and not die, which is not a very smart idea. T'Challa turns into a zombie, they devour the assassin in front of Hendrix, and already by the end of the first issue, zombies have breached the sanctuary's walls before the actual horde of zombies even gets there. Issue 2 opens with Zombie Peter annoying the other zombies with his trademark quips. Most Marvel fans understand that the deep character reason why Spider-Man quips all the time is to compensate for how nervous he is and to bring levity to those around him. Luke Cage asks Peter why he keeps up the annoying act when there's no villains to fight and no civilians to save. In fact, they're actually eating the civilians now. Peter opens up that he's now quipping more for his own sanity, not to distract him from any outside threat, but to distract himself from the things he's done. This monologue shows how much thought went into these twisted versions of these characters. Kirkman obviously has an understanding of their normal 616 counterparts, and is able to have a version of them that feels authentic do all these horrible things. It's what makes his Marvel zombie stories so disturbing, what keeps them from being just generic zombies in Marvel costumes, like they may have been with a lesser writer. Back at the Sanctuary, T'Challa and Jan are imprisoned, and Cortez has seized the throne. While there are rumors that something happened to T'Challa, the general public isn't aware that their previous ruler was dethroned because, well, he's a zombie. It's creating discord among the survivors, as some T'Challa loyalists refuse to recognize Cortez as their ruler. Forge allies with Cortez, and the two craft a plan to trick T'Challa and Jan to leave their prison so the other survivors can see what their king has become, and the Sanctuary can move forward. When Forge brings Jan and T'Challa outside their prison, their people look on in horror as they see the rumors are true. But as Cortez is monologuing, the crowd looks to the sky, even more horrified, as the Marvel zombies have finally returned home to find a new hub of humans they never knew existed. T'Challa commands Forge and Reynolds to protect the Sanctuary with their defenses and get everyone to Asteroid M. Why T'Challa thinks this would save them from this group of super cosmic zombies that just flew in from space, I don't know. Hulk immediately springs into action, but Hank stops him, arguing that rather than eating the humans, they should enslave them and turn them into a breeding camp, ensuring they have an unlimited food supply. It feels right at home with the twisted logic of Hank Pym, and is a thought maybe more horrifying than getting eaten by zombies. Spider-Man intervenes and tries to reason with him, resuming his role as the one moral voice in the zombies group. This creates disagreement among the zombies, and suddenly they start fighting each other. T'Challa yells to Reynolds to activate the shield around New Wakanda to protect their people, and while the barrier is erected, they realize they're trapped inside with the hostile Gladiator. At the beginning of issue 3, Gladiator attacks, but Forge shows up to save the day in Mark I Iron Man armor, so really that cliffhanger was a whole lot of nothing. The zombie heroes retreat to locate the abandoned Baxter building and find what's left of the interdimensional teleporter. Up on Asteroid M, we get some more characterization as Cortez storms the infirmary and demands an explanation for why the Sanctuary is filled with zombies, which is a fair question. Forge explains that they're good guys and their only hope of survival is if they work together. Reynolds, who clearly has a thing for zombie robot Jan, finally gets some action, and Spider-Man reveals the evil zombies' plan of finding the teleporter. Zombies at the Baxter building are attacked by defense robots who weren't there during the events of Marvel Zombies 1, and Hank Pym realizes that the only person capable of creating weapons like this is Forge. It turns out Forge was one step ahead of the zombies and brought the remnants of the broken teleporter to New Wakanda, although even with his mutant-level intelligence, He's unable to figure out how to get it to work. The survivors realize that another zombie attack is inevitable and that they'll need to fight them head on. Reynolds says that he has a backup plan that can help in the fight. It's the brain of Colonel America put inside the body of T'Challa's dead son. Yeah, I forgot to mention this, but there's a setup earlier in the series where it's revealed that T'Challa's son married Forge's daughter, but they both died in some mysterious accident. I really don't get why Reynolds thinks this is such a great idea, because, when you're dealing with cosmically powered super zombies, I don't see why a Frankenstein creature with the brain of an undead super soldier and the body of a normal athletic man is really going to tip the scales that much. T'Challa, predictably, is not really on board with this, and who would have thought? The zombie monster is impossible to control. Forge reveals that he helped Reynolds make the T'Challa Frankenstein, and I can't help but feel like the only purpose of this plot point was to make every character in the story have something irredeemably fucked up or evil about them, which I don't think was necessary. The survivors pull themselves together and rally, knowing the evil zombies will show up any minute for the teleporter. When the zombies arrive, T'Challa strikes a deal that they'll give them the teleporter if they agree not to eat any more humans in their dimension. Hank agrees and the survivors lower the shield. The group steps outside, and then T'Challa orders the shield to come back up. So I guess T'Challa's plan was just to buy a few seconds so he could step outside the force field and beat up the zombies? Is that really the best plan he had? It doesn't work anyway, because Iron Man sneaks inside the force field. But rather than helpless victims, he finds a suited up Forge, Cortez, and Captain Frankenstein teamed up with the other survivors, and they all put aside their differences to protect New Wakanda. Back outside, Hank smashes Black Panther, which Jan takes issue with, but she gets finished off by a quick double kill from Hank. As Reynolds watches his love seemingly die, we see Bruce Banner, who was captured by the survivors earlier, has escaped his restraints and is ready to take a bite out of Reynolds. But oh no, he accidentally pushes the joystick, which lowers the force field, allowing the rest of the zombies to break in. Hank heads straight for the survivors. Just as he's about to eat T'Challa's wife, Titan style, he realizes that it's been so long since his last meal that the hunger is completely gone. As some of the other zombie heroes come to the same realization, suddenly there's hope that after the zombies have devoured nearly the entire known universe, maybe they can still reach some kind of truce with the survivors. Following a brief interruption by a hungry Hulk that kills a few of the other zombie heroes, the survivors and the zombies start working together to rebuild humanity. Several weeks later, the group meets around the completed interdimensional teleporter. Hank tells them that they needed to rebuild it to keep their gene pool diverse and repopulate their world. But before the story ends with the zombies entering the interdimensional teleporter and giving us a predictable cliffhanger, there's a last-second twist. It turns out that Cortez was the reason Forge was never able to get the teleporter to work. He admits that he was the one behind the assassination of T'Challa, as well as the murder of his son, and plans on killing his grandson once he's of age. He enjoys being the ruler of their post-apocalyptic world, and has been thwarting their group behind the scenes to keep it that way. He sends their group to a random dimension, never to be seen again. He seemingly kills Forge, also he can reclaim the throne of New Wakanda. And that's the end of Marvel Zombies 2. Like I said before, Zombies 2 really feels like a sequel, and perhaps that's by design. The stakes are raised as Kirkman includes some of the cosmic level characters in the story. Plot threads from Zombies 1 are followed up on, and with the returning writer and artist combo, it feels like a natural extension. There are a few moments that fall short, like some head-scratching creative decisions, and an ending that feels just a little cheap, but it's without a doubt a must-read. Now, if you look ahead, you'll see that there's Marvel Zombies 3, 4, and 5, and if you're like me back when I first read these first two Marvel Zombies series, you might assume that the story continues at least into the next three numbered sequels, but no. It doesn't. The sequel series focus more on the armor division of the 616 universe, and we start seeing some 616 characters cross over into some zombie dimensions for one reason or another, and there's really not a continuation of the story that Sean Phillips and Robert Kirkman started. And that's probably the biggest disappointment of the entire Zombies project. Maybe following Zombies 2, Kirkman got busy with all his other projects and Marvel didn't want to step on what he created. I don't know, but it's a shame because I think this original zombie story had way more legs than it was given credit for. Now, before we wrap up with part 1 of our Zombies retrospective and get into the Armor saga, there's just one more entry in what I guess you could call the Kirkman saga. I don't know. Following the popularity of the zombie spin-off series, Marvel brought them back for one last entry in the title that spawned them, Ultimate Fantastic Four. Interestingly, while the story is mostly standalone, several events from the previous zombie comics we checked out affect what happens in this book. The story opens up with Johnny Storm doubling over in pain, and the four discover he's harboring an alien parasite chestburster, which he picked up from the negative zone. Ultimate Reed asks Zombie Reed for help, but Zombie Reed refuses because, well, he's evil. Reed realizes his only hope is begging for help from his nemesis, Dr. Doom. Back at the Baxter building, the zombies use Mr. Fantastic's trip to Latveria to spring an escape. Zombie Reed flashes their guard a pen, telling him he's turned it into a teleportation device with hair and food chemicals. The four suddenly disappear, and the Baxter guards rush into their cell. The four reappear, and it turns out they were just turned invisible by Zombie Sue, in a ruse that I actually thought was pretty clever, and the four start devouring. I really enjoyed this scene. It's kind of hokey, but it feels right at home with a scene you'd see in like an action horror movie from the early 2000s like Underworld. I can't really explain it. We cut to Latveria, where Reed is negotiating with Doom for his help saving Johnny. Doom says he'll only help Johnny if Reed agrees to swap bodies. Reed initially soy faces in reaction to this proposal, but ultimately agrees to Doom's plan since it's his only hope to save Johnny. The transformation is complete, and Doom, true to his word, heads back to New York and Reed's body to cure the Human Torch. The second issue ends with the reveal of, you guessed it, an interdimensional teleporter. Ultimate Fantastic Four breaks new ground in asking the question, what if the Zombies universe and another universe got connected? In the final issue of this arc, Doom, now in Reed's body, performs an exorcism on Johnny to remove the parasite. He's successful, but instead of being banished to the negative zone, the parasite escapes and heads outside to, at least according to Doom, find the most powerful host it can. The host ends up being Reed in Doom's body, but not before he dispatches the Fantastic Four zombies using Doom's magic and sends them back to the zombie dimension. And this is where things get kind of confusing. Doom reveals to everyone that Johnny's infection with the parasite was entirely his idea. He planned on Reed having to come to him for help and forcing him to change bodies. But what I don't get is if he purposefully fucks up the spell to exorcise the parasite or not. When he fails to send the parasite to the negative zone, he freaks out, which makes sense since Doom can't handle failure, but it's not clear if he's acting. As I mentioned, Doom says that the parasite is headed for the strongest being it could find. It actually skips over Thor, who's hanging out nearby, and fuses with Doom. Is Doom really more powerful than Ultimate Thor? At first, I thought that even this was part of Doom's plan, that he not only planned to swap bodies with Reed, but he would also get him infected, so he'd have to banish himself to another dimension. But when Reed decides he needs to sacrifice himself and enter the zombie dimension to kill the parasite, Doom stops him, undoes the body swap, and decides to sacrifice himself instead. I like the idea of this scene as it shows that Doom is a lawful evil type with a code of honor. What difference does it make to Doom if Reed is relegated to a foreign dimension to never return? He outsmarted Reed, he got exactly what he wanted, so why does he feel compelled to make this sacrifice? Now, Ultimate Doom does eventually come back in the Ultimate Power event, but I don't believe the Ultimate Universe dabbles with zombies ever again after this point. The second and final Zombies tie-in, similar to the first one, is a great Fantastic Four story, but doesn't really scratch that zombie's itch. It only moves the zombieverse insofar as the zombie FF return to their dimension, but beyond that, it's hardly essential if you just want the core zombie story. But at the same time, you can't really hold that against the comic because it is an Ultimate Fantastic Four story first and foremost. It's solid, especially if you don't think about the ending too hard, but it's definitely skippable if you're just looking for Marvel Zombies. So that wraps up part 1 of our Marvel Zombies retrospective. I did plot this out, and I'm almost certain this will end up being 3 parts. Stay tuned, next part should be coming out in just a few weeks. Keep an eye out on the Shorts tab as well as my TikTok page. In the meantime, I post solid stuff on there in between these longer YouTube essays. But please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. I'll see you in the next one, and happy Halloween.